Tonight on Primetime Politics, how united is the Liberal caucus?
Members of Parliament will understand it's not about them, it's about meeting the moment as a nation.
Questions are being asked today regarding how many Liberals have concerns about the government's energy deal with Alberta. Steven Guilbeault resigned cabinet over it. Will others follow? We'll speak to the Ottawa Bureau Chiefs. Also, despite the BC Premier expressing his opposition to a new pipeline and the MOU, the Business Council of British Columbia is applauding the deal. We'll find out why. And what we've learned from the first NDP leadership debate. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. The Carney government is now assessing the fallout of that MOU signed with Alberta yesterday. It's a deal that prioritizes at least one new pipeline to the BC coast, plus carbon capture and other investments. But it is also a deal that led former Minister Steven Guilbeault to quit the Carney cabinet, opposed to the rollback of several environmental regulations that Guilbeault championed when he led the environment file for Justin Trudeau. It had some reporters asking today if the government is worried about losing more ministers. Take a listen to how François-Philippe Champagne, the finance minister, answered that question.
So I'm not concerned with respect to other colleagues. Like I said, I think people understand as well that we need, the roadmap is going to achieve both things, is, being a responsible and sustainable producer of natural resources while at the same time reducing carbon emission. I'm confident, like I was last time, that members of Parliament will understand it's not about them. It's about meeting the moment as a nation to make sure that we can position Canada well for this new world.
So confident the MOU signed yesterday will meet economic and environmental goals. But did the Prime Minister do enough to sell this agreement with Alberta to his cabinet and his caucus? Well, that issue started off this week's episode of the Bureau Chiefs podcast. Take a listen now to my conversation with Robert Fife from the Globe and Mail, Tonda MacCharles from the Toronto Star, and Joël-Denis Bellavance from La Presse. Okay, so, I do want to begin with Steven Guilbeault because he leaves not the day after this deal is signed, but mere hours after this deal is signed. What does his departure from cabinet say essentially about caucus unity here, Bob, and the challenge before the Prime Minister to make sure that all Liberal MPs are on side?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's going to be as big of a challenge as it may seem to be. Mr. Guilbeault was an environmental crusader even before he came into Parliament. He did bring in a lot of these regulations and measures that many people in the business community, not just in the oil and gas sector, but in wide sectors of the Canadian economy, thought had gone too far. And I applaud him for sticking to his principles and resigning. Very few people have principles like he has, and that's fine. But I don't think you're going to get, I think there'll be issues raised in caucus for sure as they talk these things out, but I don't think it's going to be destabilizing this government. They've just won an election. Mr. Carney has been very clear about the direction he wants to take the country in terms of getting more infrastructure and resource projects going. And he has a plan that he will argue on terms of having a stable carbon price that will be effective over the long term. And he does have credentials on that. He's written books on it. He's been a United Nations envoy on this issue. But he's going to have to not only explain this to the Liberal caucus, but he's going to have to explain it to the country, because to me that is the larger issue, because you're seeing a lot of divisions right now and concerns raised by environmental groups and younger people who are deeply concerned about the economy. So I think that's the issue for him.
Okay, we'll pick up on that in a bit, but focusing in right now on the Liberal caucus and with Steven Guilbeault's departure, what does this say about the potential challenge that sets up for the Prime Minister?
I think that we haven't yet quite got a handle on how widespread any of those concerns are. I do think that there are concerns, a lot of concerns, in the BC caucus. And we saw some of those tensions unfold behind closed doors. To what extent they'll come out in the open, not clear. I agree with Bob that I'm not sure we'll see other resignations from cabinet. And I too think, you know, it's great that finally a cabinet minister who has a fundamental disagreement on principle with the cabinet is able to do the honorable thing and step out of the cabinet in protest of that. Like, we don't see, when's the last time we saw that in Ottawa? 20 years, that's what I thought, Michael Chung on, in the Harper government. So,
Jody Wilson-Raybould? Jody Wilson-Raybould?
Oh,
I suppose, but it wasn't, that wasn't directly on the issue, right? It was
being shuffled out.
Forced out.
Yeah.
But in any event, I think that I think there are concerns within the caucus, within the BC caucus, within Quebec caucus. I do think that some of this will be a tough sell for Liberal MPs with constituents who care about, be it environmental policy or Indigenous reconciliation. And so let's see how that plays out. But yeah, I think much of it will play out behind closed doors, depending on how Mr. Carney handles it. And frankly, he hasn't showed himself to be a really skilled handler of caucus concerns.
Okay, I'm going to pick up on that point definitely in the next question. But before we go there, Joël-Denis, what's your take on it?
That's where I was going. This is still, I think, a warning for Mr. Carney to be able to communicate more and better with his own caucus. Some feel that they were told or informed at a too late stage about the deal that was about to be signed between the federal government and Alberta. And so communication is key for a caucus to be a healthy discussions, and also for the Prime Minister to remain a leader in charge. Otherwise, if you got dissensions within your own ranks, it's harder to sell afterwards policies to Canadians. So it begins with the caucus communications, and that needs to improve in my sense.
Okay, we're going to continue this conversation in a moment, but I do want to bring in a little bit of Tim Hodgson, who I spoke with last night. And he talked a bit about, well, not a bit, but the focus was the MOU, and making the argument that the government is taking a double stand here, one for the economy, the other for the environment. Take a listen to what he's saying about that, but also a little bit of an addendum about bringing in the caucus on issues like this. Take a listen to the the Energy Minister.
Our Prime Minister has said he is focused on outcomes, not how we get there. We are sharing a goal. We are sharing a goal with Alberta and with the other provinces that we will get to net zero by 2050. That goal is clear. It is a shared goal. It is laid out clearly in the MOU. How we are getting there is slightly different than we have planned in the past, but now we have agreement with the province, Alberta, an important province, on how to get there. And we're getting those same sorts of agreements with other provinces too. We are moving forward and we are moving towards net zero. It is a slightly different path. It's a path we need to achieve. And that's what I'm focused on. I think that's what the Prime Minister is focusing on. We need to bring our caucus along on that. That's work to do.
Okay, so work to do, and again, that's the Energy Minister from yesterday. And I have to say that I was speaking with a Liberal strategist this week, and they essentially said, when describing the challenge right now within caucus, is that here we have a Prime Minister who's very certain about what his priorities are, but one of those priorities does not seem to be bringing caucus along to understand what those priorities are. How much of a problem is this going to be for the Prime Minister?
Well, look, if that's it, probably the Achilles heel of this Prime Minister is that he knows he's the smartest guy in the room, and so it's my way or the doorway. And he's not a politician, and he's not used to understanding that successful prime ministers need to sell policies to their caucus to get them behind them. Jean Chrétien, until the mutiny by Paul Martin, paid a lot of attention to his caucus. Brian Mulroney was famous for even the worst periods of time when the government was right on death's door. That caucus stood with him all the way. Mr. Carney doesn't even have a caucus liaison person, and that is your eyes and ears into the caucus. And if he doesn't fix that problem, it could blow up on him. I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow, but you've got to pay attention to your caucus, because they're frontline soldiers. They're the ones that are going out to sell your policies to Canadians. They meet people on the doorsteps. They have a good sense. When they come back, they can feed you information. So I think that's a political problem that could become a much more serious issue for them.
And it's one thing for, as Mr. Hodgson says, we're going to go about it in a different way, meeting our net zero targets for 2050. And he doesn't care so much about how they get there. Well, how they get there is gutting the national climate policy that this Liberal Party and most of that caucus has backed for a decade. So if you're going to ask them to back up, reverse, and just drop it and suddenly sell, put all your eggs in the industrial carbon pricing basket and carbon capture and storage, which is what Carney's doing. He's laying all of the goals and the action of getting to those targets on those two main policies, then you better have some people to bring along with you and to go out there and sell it to the rest of the country. So yes, there is an appetite, and people are right now pretty defensive vis-a-vis the trade uncertainties and the damage, the economic damage, and they want the country to build and work together. But I think they also want to be treated like adults and not just told what's coming at them. And speaking of caucus management, I mean, Mr. Hodgson went in and scolded the BC caucus this week for being Boy Scouts on climate change. Well, that's not the way you go about it. So good luck with that. That's a method, but perhaps maybe not so efficient.
JD?
Well, in the same vein, I would say that it's a learning curve for Mr. Carney. He's, adapted well in many spheres of his political life, namely abroad. When he goes abroad, people respect him. You could see that he's very comfortable, but he's got to get more comfortable dealing with his own caucus. And that's key. It's key to a very successful prime minister like Brian Mulroney, as Bob alluded to, who was cajoling, calling MPs, telling them that he felt the condolences when they were hit by a tragedy. And so the caucus paid it back to him by supporting him, in tough times and in good times. And that's what you need when you're prime minister and leader of a party, especially the Liberal Party.
Another prime minister who held his caucus together through a lot of tough policies and trying to sort of tamp down even the social conservatives within his caucus was Stephen Harper. Yep. Stephen Harper was able to maintain caucus unity up to the time he lost government. So those were tough years. There were big changes in Canadian policy, taking the country in a different direction, but he kept his caucus with him for the most part.
Well, I was talking, as I said, to a few strategists this week, and I was likening it to a contractor. Here you have the Carney government fixing the piping and the electrical on the house, but ultimately there's no real estate agent to sell the kitchen and the bathroom, which is why people buy homes, right? And so I think that's a fundamental flaw that this government has yet to still address. And
let me say, it's also a flaw of the Prime Minister, who is not a very good salesperson. He's a smart guy and he's got a vision, but he has a difficulty selling it. When you listen to him, it's not the most exciting, riveting moments. And I mean, I don't think that's going to change with him, but it is, you do need to be able to get those ideas off the paper into people's brains so they support it.
Or appoint someone or find someone who can.
Yeah.
Well, it's not. Actually, I disagree on that. I don't think it is up to just caucus to sell your ideas for you. In the case of Indigenous peoples, that is a relationship between the federal crown and Indigenous peoples and Indigenous nations. That's what I'm saying. The federal crown, as the Prime Minister, arguing, persuading, accommodating, meeting with the Indigenous leaders where they're at on the issues that matter to them, over which they hold rights. And he's paid lip service to it, but I don't think he's invested political capital in it directly yet.
And that was Robert Fife, the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail, Tonda MacCharles, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, and Joël-Denis Bellavance, the Ottawa Bureau Chief for La Presse. And what you heard is part of the new podcast from PrimeTime Politics and CPAC. It is called The Bureau Chiefs with Michael Serapio. New episodes drop each week that PrimeTime Politics is on air, and you can get the latest episode now. Well, regardless of the political debate, both the MOU and Guilbeault's resignation is causing, one group that is very much in favor of this new energy deal is the Business Council of British Columbia. Take a look at the statement the group released on the MOU, simply stating this is good. And with more, we're now joined by Laura Jones, the council's president and CEO. Laura, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So I'll begin with a very simple question. Why this overwhelming, if not entirely short, statement of support? What benefit do you think this MOU will actually bring to British Columbia?
It's probably the shortest press release we've ever done at the Business Council of British Columbia. This is good. So I'll elaborate on it a little bit. I think it's very good for the province of British Columbia and for the country. So for a couple of reasons. First of all, of course, a memorandum of understanding is not in and of itself a project, and we'd be many years out from an actual project in this space. But what this memorandum of understanding does is it sends a clear message to investors that Canada is open for business, that we are prepared to say yes to projects and the possibility of projects. Of course, there are things that will need to be worked out along the way, but that we are prepared to say yes, we are open for business. And that is really critical right now for this country because our economy is not in great shape. And as we know, we need to diversify our exports. And exports from this sector are just critical. So our oil represents about a quarter of our exports, $150 billion a year. So this is a very good day for Canada.
And yet we continue to hear Premier Eby express his concerns about this MOU and really about any pipeline, because he clearly believes that the discussion of a new oil pipeline is at this point a distraction. Also adds to it that it undermines the kind of trust that the First Nations have given to the provincial government to move on other matters. Do you share any of that concern?
Well, I would say that it is important to have the trust and to work with First Nations on these projects. Environmental concerns are also very important, and you're not going to go ahead with a pipeline at any cost. That's not what we're talking about here. But what we're talking about here is being open to the possibility of a pipeline. And again, that sends a very important message to investors, not just to investors who might be interested in this project, but to investors who might be interested in other projects in Canada, that we are open for business. And I think that that's really critical.
Critical, as you say, but I'm thinking about the most recent Angus Reid poll that came out last night, and it does show that the majority of British Columbians are in favor of some type of pipeline, although it's a bare majority. I think it sits at about 53% of British Columbians. Talk to us about the work that needs to be done to get people in the province on side, because without public support, one wonders how far this is going to go.
I think if a pipeline were to go forward, it would need to be an and proposition. So it can't be the pipeline at the expense of environmental considerations. It needs to be an and proposition. And there's another poll I heard about today from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business doing a poll of their small business members saying that 9 out of 10 of them think that both these pipelines can go forward with appropriate environmental conditions in place. And I think that that's where a lot of British Columbians and a lot of Canadians sit. So it's not a blank check. We need to make sure that we are looking after the environment and protecting the environment, and we need to make sure that it's done with appropriate consultation with First Nations.
Well, to that, the biggest point of contention seems to be the Hecate Strait and having oil tankers in BC's northern waters. Do you see an alternative to it? Because really, with either Kitimat or Prince Rupert, that's where a tanker would theoretically go, through the Hecate Strait, the North Shore. Right now, there is a moratorium on shipping there, on oil tankers there. Is there a less contentious route that might actually work?
I think there very well may be a less contentious route that would work, and that's something that obviously people would need to really consider, is what does that look like? And I look at when the province decided to go forward with LNG, one of the things it did was there was no blank check, just go forward with LNG with no constraints, no other considerations. There were 5 conditions put on the development of that sector here. And I think you'd probably be looking at something like that for the coast. But that's kind of a long way. That's a little bit further down the road. I think for today, what this memorandum does is it says Canada is open for business, and not just with the idea that we're open to a pipeline, by the way. There's some really destructive policy that we're now not going forward with. So there was a proposed emissions cap that was a big cloud of uncertainty uncertainty on Canada's investment climate, and that proposed emissions cap is not going forward, which is another very good thing, not just for Canada overall, but for British Columbia, because that emissions cap would have been very, very problematic for British Columbia's gas sector. It was so problematic that it was requiring emissions reductions that were greater than the actual emissions. So it was an emissions cap that made 0 sense, and it's very good to see that one kicked to the curb.
Laura Jones, appreciate the thoughts on this. Thank you. We'll speak again soon.
Thanks.
Well, not surprisingly, Steven Guilbeault's resignation did come up last night in Montreal, that city hosting the first NDP leadership debate ahead of the party's leadership convention, which will take place next March in Winnipeg. And when the candidates were asked if the former Liberal Environment Minister would be invited to join the NDP, well, take a listen to some of the responses.
Mr. Guilbeault quit cabinet, but he did not quit the party. He did not quit caucus. If he really believed that this was a fundamental problem for him, why didn't he walk away? You know, it just means he's not interested in doing his work.
I don't think us reaching out to Liberal Party members is the right way for the NDP to communicate in BC.
Should the NDP ask him to join the NDP caucus?
I said, aujourd'hui, Mr. Guilbeault.
So that is the reaction to Steven Guilbeault last night. But let's talk a bit more about the debate itself. CPAC's Rémi Authier was in Montreal. Rémi, hello.
Hello.
So as I said, you were in Montreal last night, and I think we can put 2 and 2 together. There's a reason why the NDP chooses Montreal as the first location for their first debate, because it was Quebec and the Orange Wave that, brought them as far as they did, official opposition back in 2011. But to repeat that, remembering that, Jack Layton was very good in French. Whoever becomes the next leader would have to have some fluency in French, I think, to do well in Quebec. What can you tell us about the performance in the official language?
Well, we saw a field of candidates with really an uneven mastery of French. And one that really stood out is Avi Lewis, who clearly was the one that could most articulate his ideas, put forward his vision, and stayed the whole debate speaking in French when the questions were in French, or in English when questions were in English. Heather McPherson also did speak French quite aptly. She was able, again, to make known her position, but when compared to Avi Lewis, there seemed to be a clear gap. However, it's the 3 others candidates that really had a difficult night, actually. Tony Johnston, Rob Ashton, and Tony McQuail all had to switch to English when they were asked questions in French outside of the period where they had prepared declaration, which was allowed during the debate, but we clearly saw some difficulty from them in trying to present themselves as being able to communicate with Quebecers. Let's hear some excerpts.
Une voix attend le NPD ici au Québec. Il faut qu'on la prenne.
Mais j'ai déjà fait de porte-à-porte et rencontré les membres partout dans la province.
Pour bâtir une coalition verte et progressive qui gagne.
Je dois mieux parler français pour connecter avec les Québécois.
Et je vais apprendre le français parce que c'est important.
Well, as you say, uneven, and if they want to repeat some success in French, we'll have to, or in Quebec rather, we're going to have to see how they improve in their French language skills. So watching that, but beyond the fluency in the French language, I wonder, as you watched that debate last night in Montreal, in terms of policy, what were you able to learn about each candidate, because they do come to the table with different priorities?
Exactly, and we didn't witness a clash of idea. We have to say that, but the fact that they had difficulty in French created an environment where they didn't go at each other. They really tried to present their own vision. But we did see differences between candidates. Let's take Rob Ashton, for example, who is, of course, president of the Longshoremen Union, really tried to present himself as there for the working class and had ideas like protecting strike rights and cap on food that would help the cost of living. Tony Johnston, who is Indigenous, she put a lot of emphasis on First Nation rights, and she also proposed post-secondary education should be free in the country. Avi Lewis really put forward this idea of a bigger government, a bigger presence for government in public grocery stores, in public service internet providers that would come from the government and would be able to limit costs. So that was really a vision that was able to articulate in both languages, as I said. Heather McPherson, she really bet on her experience in the House, in having proposed some bills and having a national housing plan that she puts forward during this campaign. And finally, for Tony McQuail, what was interesting is that he had really one issue. It's first past the post, which he wants to get rid of. So we had different views, different approach, and we are going to have another debate in February in Vancouver. It's going to be also partly in French. We're going to have to see if there's improvement there.
Okay, I suspect you're going to be booting and arguing that you should be in Vancouver for that debate.
Maybe, we'll see.
Rémi Authier, thank you for that. Well, before we go this evening, we wanted to share with you part of a conversation I had with James Bazan at the Halifax International Security Forum. And as many people know, Mr. Bazan is the Conservative Shadow Minister for Defence. And we spent some time talking about Canada's upcoming defence industrial strategy. Now, Canadians know a bit about it already. That's thanks to changes in military procurement and spending priorities laid out in the federal budget. But as an overall policy and document, we're still waiting, still listen to what Mr. Bazan says he'll be watching out for when that policy comes out.
You know, I'm not sure what we're going to see. Well, I'm not sure who they've been talking to. We haven't had a whole bunch of feedback yet, and we know that the last time they did foreign policy, they didn't talk to anyone. They just pretty much wrote it down on the back of a napkin and read it in the House of Commons when Chrysler Freeland delivered it. What was that, 7 years ago already? So defense industrial strategy is something that is critical. You know, we want to make sure that we are supporting Canada's defense industry and the things that we do well. And so, and we want to make sure that we're supporting those entrepreneurs that are innovators, and that Canada becomes an early adapter of that innovation. You know, there's no question that part of our sovereignty is our sovereign capability to produce military equipment, to produce the intelligence, as well as produce the innovation and technology that we need to keep driving us ahead and being ahead of our adversaries. The world is becoming a lot more dangerous place, and God forbid war breaks out like it did in World War II, we're going to be scrambling. And I can tell you that all our allies and friends are going to be busy building military hardware and software for themselves first. And so we have to have that capability in Canada. So we're not going to be able to be all things to everyone, but we can be the specialists in a lot of great little niche parts of the military defense industrial complex. And so I hope to see some of that and investing and targeting the sectors in Canada that can actually produce some of that, and where we are world leaders, like in AI, like in cybersecurity, as a way that we can move forward. There's a growing need, of course, in the world of drones and other autonomous vehicles, whether it's in the air, on the surface, on the sea, or under the sea. And I hope to see us, as we witnessed in Ukraine, out of need, a great industry is growing. We don't have to reinvent the wheel here, but we need to be adaptable and continue to move forward as these technologies evolve. And so there is a great opportunity here. And, you know, there is a chance, you know, there's no question that by using government dollars to invest in defense and national security equipment and processes, hopefully those taxpayer dollars are going to the benefit of more and more Canadian jobs and opportunities for our industry.
The Conservative Shadow Minister for Defence, James Bazan. And we do have a longer conversation, which you can see on our website and on our YouTube channel. And Mr. Bazan will also be featured in an upcoming episode of Profile on the Halifax International Security Forum. As for Primetime Politics, that is our program for this evening. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. We'll see you on Monday. And until then, have a great weekend.